In this video, we're going to discuss the anatomy and function of the spinal nerves. Before diving into it, let's recall that the nervous system is structurally subdivided into the central nervous system, CNS, which includes the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS. Spinal nerves arise from the spinal cord. There are 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal spinal nerves. Spinal nerves are formed by 2 roots, the anterior and the posterior root, which merge in the intervertebral foramen. The sensory spinal ganglion, which contains cell bodies of peripheral sensory neurons, adheres to the posterior root. In humans, these neurons are pseudo-unipolar. The peripheral process ends with receptors, and the central process enters the posterior horn of the spinal cord as part of the posterior root of the spinal nerve. The anterior root consists of motor or efferent fibers coming out of the anterior horn of the spinal cord. These fibers carry motor information from the CNS to the target organs, for example, to muscles of the body. The autonomic, sympathetic fibers enter into the spinal nerves at the level between the first thoracic to the second lumbar segments. The cell bodies of these sympathetic neurons are located in the lateral horns of the spinal cord, which can be found in all thoracic and the first and second lumbar segments of the spinal cord. And some sources also include the 8th cervical segment. For the most part, the spinal nerves exit the spinal canal through the intervertebral foramen under the corresponding vertebra. Only 7 superior cervical nerves do it the other way around, passing through the intervertebral foramen above the corresponding vertebra. In the sacral region, the nerves exit through the sacral foramina. Then each spinal nerve is divided into 3 branches: the anterior, posterior, and meningeal branches. The meningeal branch goes back into the spinal canal through the intervertebral foramen and innervates the spinal meninges. The posterior or dorsal ramus passes posteriorly between the transverse processes of the vertebrae and innervates the postvertebral muscles and the skin of the back. The anterior or ventral ramus innervates the skin and muscles of the neck and the anterior aspect of the trunk and limbs. The thoracic anterior rami remain segmental and become the intercostal nerves in the intercostal spaces. In the other parts of the body, the anterior rami interconnect with each other, forming the cervical, brachial, lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal plexuses, which give rise to the peripheral nerves. Moreover, there are 2 types of branches that connect the spinal nerves and the sympathetic trunk. Wide rami communicantes only exit the spinal cord between the levels of T1 to L2. They carry preganglionic sympathetic fibers that pass to the ganglia of the sympathetic trunk. Gray rami communicantes exist at all levels of the spinal cord. They carry postganglionic sympathetic fibers from the ganglia of the sympathetic trunk to the target organs. In the following videos, we will focus in greater detail on specific nerve plexuses and their nerves. Alright, here's a quick summary. Spinal nerves, as well as the cranial nerves, are part of the peripheral nervous system, PNS. Spinal nerves are formed by 2 roots, the anterior root and the posterior root, which merge together in the intervertebral foramen. The anterior root contains efferent nerve fibers, which carry stimuli away from the CNS, and the posterior root contains afferent nerve fibers, which return sensory information from the periphery to the CNS. Each spinal nerve is divided into 3 branches: anterior, posterior, and meningeal branches. The anterior rami interconnect with each other, forming the nerve plexuses which give rise to the peripheral nerves. The white and gray rami communicantes are responsible for relaying autonomic signals between the spinal nerves and the sympathetic trunk.